It is a realm of unparalleled beauty, a land of blessing, home of the great powers of Middle-earth. But it was not always a land of bliss, for its history would be marred by the Dark Lord and bloodshed between its inhabitants. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover the history of Valinor. The continent of Aman comes about as a result of Melkor destroying the two lamps in the Valian year 3450. Retreating across the sea, the Valar would over the next 500 Valian years, which equate to 4,750 of our own years, settle and make safe the lands of Aman. During this time, they would raise the tallest mountains in the world alongside the eastern shore. These Pelori Mountains stand as a guard against Melkor. Upon Taniquetil, the highest peak, the Valar would place Ilmarin, the halls of Manwe and Varda, where they could look out across the earth. But it is behind their mountain range that the Valar would establish their great realm, Valinor. Upon the plains, they would establish the city of Valmar of Many Bells, where many of the Valar and Maiar would live. To the west of the city lies the greened mound of Azelohar. Then Nienna, Vala of Pity and Sorrow, watered the mound with her tears, and Yavanna, Vala of the Earth, began a song. And as they watched, upon the mound there came forth two slender shoots. And silence was all over the world in that hour, nor was there any other sound save the chanting of Yavanna. Under her song the saplings grew and became fair and tall, and came to flower. And thus there awoke in the world the two trees of Valinor. Of all things which Yavanna made, they have most renown, and about their fate all the tales of the elder days are woven. The two trees give light to all Valinor for all their days, the silver Telperion and golden Laurelin. They would each wax and wane in their turn, giving their own distinct light throughout the days of Aman. In Valinor, the Valar are able to create their idyllic land, a land with no stain upon flower or leaf, and no corruption or sickness in anything that lives. While Valimar would be a greatly important location for the Valar and Maiar, there are many other locations of great importance to each of the Valar. Primary among these is Mahanaxar, the Ring of Doom. This was the hall where the thrones of the Valar were set. But among the Valar, it was not only Manwe and Varda who would have their own dwellings outside Valimar. On the northern shores of Valinor, overlooking the encircling sea to the west of Aman, are the Halls of Mandos. Also known as the Halls of Awaiting, this is where the spirits of elves would go should their bodies be slain. There they would await re-embodiment. Mandos' sister, Nienna, would live in her halls further to the west, where her tears would flow as she looked out to the great sea. South of the Halls of Mandos were the Gardens of Lorien. Named for the Vala of dreams and visions, these gardens would be home to both him and his wife, Este, the healer of hurts. Yavanna would reside in great pastures in the south of Aman. Not far away to the northeast were the woods of Orome, where the great huntsman would often go tracking and hunting its many creatures. But it would not only be the great powers that would call Valinor home. Eventually, it would also be home to elves, the firstborn of Iluvatar. After their awakening far away in the eastern lands of Middle-earth, the Valar would intervene against Melkor for the elves' protection. The Dark Lord is captured and taken to the halls of Mandos and imprisoned. For no one, not even a mighty Vala like Melkor, could escape the Doomsman's halls once they entered. Around the year of the trees 1133, the first of the elves would be brought across the sea to Aman, At this time, the Valar would open the Calakiria, a pass in the Pelori Mountains allowing the light of the two trees to reach this land immediately outside the mountain range. Here the elves establish Eldamar, the land of the elves in Aman. One of its main settlements is Tirion, upon the hill of Tuna, where the Noldor and Vanyar elves live. Another is Alqualondë, the seaside city of the shipbuilding Teleri elves. And the very island which the Valar used to ferry the elves to Aman itself would be permanently placed just off the coast. Upon this island of Tol Eressëa would lie the city, seaport, and haven of Avallónë, the easternmost settlement of the elves of the uttermost west. For many years, the elves Valar and Maiar would live in peace in this beautiful realm, a land of bliss, lit by the wondrous light of the two trees. However, in the year of the trees 1400, Melkor begs for pardon, and it is granted, though he is restricted to dwell in the lands of Valinor. With his newfound freedom, Melkor befriends the Noldor and subtly begins to sow discord among them, most notably in the heart of Feanor, greatest craftsman of all the elves and maker of the Silmarils. And despite war never having come to the Undying Lands, Melkor instructs the Noldor in the making of armor and weapons. Among the lies Melkor feeds to Feanor are that the Valar are ill-pleased, that his Silmarils are not in their own possession, and that his half-brother Fingolfin seeks to usurp his father Finwe's leadership among their people. In the year of the trees 1490, this manifests when Feanor threatens his half-brother Fingolfin, drawing a sword upon him. For this action, Feanor is banished from Tirion by the Valar. Feanor and his sons go north and establish the stronghold of Formenos. Finwe also goes to Formenos out of love for his son. For a time, Melkor was not to be seen in Valinor, and no one would hear any word of him. And it is said that the light of the two trees was dimmed, and the shadows of all standing things grew longer and darker in that time. 2 years of the trees later, in 1492, Melkor comes to Formenos. There he attempts to manipulate Feanor. "Behold the truth of all that I have spoken, and how thou art banished unjustly. But if the heart of Feanor is yet free and bold, as were his words in Tirion, then I will aid him, and bring him far from this narrow land. For am I not Valar also? Yea, and more than those who sit in pride in Valimar. And I have ever been a friend to the Noldor, most skilled and most valiant of the people of Arda." Now Feanor's heart was still bitter at his humiliation before Mandos, and he looked at Melkor in silence, pondering if indeed he might yet trust him so far as to aid him in his flight. And Melkor, seeing that Feanor wavered, and knowing that the Silmarils held his heart in thrall, said at the last, "Here is a strong place and well guarded. But think not that the Silmarils will lie safe in any treasury within the realm of the Valar." But his cunning overreached his aim. His words touched too deep, and awoke a fire more fierce than he designed. And Feanor looked upon Melkor with eyes that burned through his fair semblance, and pierced the cloaks of his mind, perceiving there his fierce lust for the Silmarils. Then hate overcame Feanor's fear, and he cursed Melkor and bade him gone, saying, "Get thee gone from my gate, thou jail crow of Mandos." And he shut the doors of his house in the face of the mightiest of all the dwellers in Ea. With this setback in his plans to obtain the Silmarils, Melkor flees to the far south of Aman. There, in the lands of Avathar, he encounters a great and powerful spirit, which takes the form of the greatest spider to ever exist, Ungoliant, the Gloomweaver. Abandoning his fair form, Melkor once again appears as a dark lord, tall and terrible, and he pledges to Ungoliant in return for her service do as I bid, and if thou hunger still when all is done, then I will give thee whatsoever thy lust may demand. Yea, with both hands." Lightly he made this vow, as he ever did, and he laughed in his heart. Thus did the great thief set his lure for the lesser. Ungoliant weaves a web of darkness about them, and these two great and terrible beings make their way toward Valinor, first coming to the summit of Hyarmentir, then descending and traveling north, they would make their way at last to the two trees. And even as Feanor and Fingolfin were reconciling during a great festival made by the Valar, Melkor strikes the two trees to their cores with his spear, and their sap pours forth as if it were blood, and was spilled upon the ground. Ungoliant drinks the sap until they are drained, and drinks dry the wells of Varda, the pools at their base which caught the dew of the two trees. As Valinor is plunged into darkness, Melkor makes his way to Formenos. There he kills Finwe and steals the Silmarils. Melkor and Ungoliant flee to Middle-earth, where the spider, now grown to an enormous size, wishes to consume the Silmarils to feed her lust. Melkor is barely saved by his Balrogs and takes the Silmarils to his fortress of Angband. Meanwhile, in Valinor, Feanor learns of the theft of the Silmarils, and while Melkor had been revealed as a traitor, his whispers to Feanor and his people years before would bear fruit. Feanor curses the Valar and their supposed desire to keep them from ruling their own lands in Middle-earth. He and his son swear a terrible oath to reclaim the Silmarils from anyone, friend or foe, and he names Melkor Morgoth, meaning Dark Tyrant or the Black Foe. Initially, nearly all of the Noldor would follow Feanor. They leave in groups, the first of which is led by Feanor himself. The last is led by Fingolfin and his youngest brother, Finarfin. Feanor leads his people to the shores of Aman and the port of Alqualondë. There he demands the Teleri to give the Noldor their ships, so that they may pursue Morgoth. The Teleri refuse, wishing to stop their friends from making a rash mistake and going against the word of the Valar. In his wrath, Feanor and his people attack the Teleri, and what follows is the first kinslaying of elves against elves, and after Morgoth's murder of Finwe, the second bloodshed in Valinor. Coming late to the battle, Fingolfin and Finarfin would only later learn of what had transpired. As the entire group of the Noldor makes its way up the coast, Mandos appears, pronouncing the doom of the Noldor. "Ye have spilled the blood of your kindred unrighteously, and have stained the land of Aman. For blood ye shall render blood, and beyond Aman ye shall dwell in death's shadow. For though Eru appointed you to die not in Ea, and no sickness may assail you, yet slain ye may be, and slain ye shall be, by weapon and by torment and by grief, and your houseless spirits shall come then to Mandos. There long shall ye abide and yearn for your bodies, and find little pity, though all whom ye have slain should entreat for you. And those that endure in Middle-earth and come not to Mandos shall grow weary of the world as with a great burden, and shall wane and become as shadows of regret before the younger race that cometh after. The Valar have spoken." While Feanor and a great many of the Noldor would go on by boat or by the dangerous crossing of the frozen Helcaraxe in the far north to Middle-earth, Finarfin and a small group of his people would forsake the march, and returning to Valinor they would receive the pardon of the Valar. And while his brother Fingolfin and his sons and his daughter Galadriel would take the route of the Helcaraxe, Finarfin would be made leader of the Noldor who remained in Valinor, a mere 10% of their total number. Finally, in the 1500th year of the trees, the Valar would create the sun and the moon to give light to all the world of Arda. These are made from the last fruit and flower of the two trees, brought forth by the song of Yavanna and the tears of Nienna. After Morgoth's failed attack upon the Maya guiding the moon, the Valar would make moves to defend Valinor. Not only would they hide it from the mortal lands with mists and shadows, but they would raise the Pelori Mountains to sheer and dreadful heights. And so Valinor would remain closed to all for hundreds of years, as the elves and men of Middle-earth would struggle against Morgoth. As the Dark Lord's grasp upon Beleriand becomes stronger, there would be multiple attempts by the elves to sail to Valinor to ask for the aid of the Valar. One is the doomed voyage of 495 of the First Age, where Varanwe is the sole survivor of his people, who washes ashore at Nevrast, where he meets Tuor. It would later be Tuor himself, after the fall of Gondolin, who attempts his own voyage to the Undying Lands. In 525, he and his wife Idril depart for Valinor, and according to the elves and men, it was told that they would arrive in the uttermost west. The next to sail for the shores of Aman is Tuor and Idril's son, Eärendil. Having escaped the third kinslaying with a Silmaril, Eärendil's wife Elwing joins him in his voyage. Eärendil would successfully navigate to the lands of Aman, and he would make his way inland to the elven city. But Eärendil climbed the green hill of Tuna and found it bare, and he entered into the streets of Tirion, and they were empty. And his heart was heavy, for he feared that some evil had come even to the blessed realm. He walked in the deserted ways of Tirion, and the dust upon his raiment and his shoes was a dust of diamonds, and he shone and glistened as he climbed the long white stairs. And he called aloud in many tongues, both of elves and men, but there were none to answer him. Therefore he turned back at last towards the sea. But even as he took the shoreward road, one stood upon the hill and called to him in a great voice, crying, "Hail Eärendil, of mariners most renowned, the looked for that cometh at unawares, the longed for that cometh beyond hope. Hail Eärendil, bearer of light before the sun and moon, splendor of the children of the earth, star in the darkness, jewel in the sunset, radiant in the morning." The Valar, moved by Eärendil's plea for aid, prepare a mighty host to wage war upon Morgoth. Among these are Maiar, like Manwe's herald Eonwe, as well as the Vanyar elves. While much of the story of the elves in Valinor revolves around the Noldor, the Vanyar likewise lived in Valinor since those early days, though they had remained skeptical of Melkor after his release, and only one of their number would leave with the Noldor. Thus, for the first time since their coming to Aman, the Vanyar would travel to Middle-earth. With them is none other than Finarfin, leading his group of Noldor. As we've covered elsewhere, this War of Wrath results in the defeat of Morgoth, and the Valar cast him through the Door of Night, a mysterious passageway in the far west leading to the Void. Ever after, the Silmaril upon Eärendil's brow could be seen by those in Middle-earth as a great star as he sailed the sky. It is said that in or near Aman, Elwing's tower was built for her upon the borders of the outer world, in the northern regions of the Sundering Seas, from which she could fly to meet Eärendil in his journeys in the sky. Soon after the War of Wrath, the Valar raise out of the Great Sea an island as a reward for the men who fought alongside the elves against Morgoth, the island of Númenor. Fearing that these great mariners would be tempted to enter Aman, they forbade them from sailing out of eyesight of their own western coastline. Over centuries and millennia, the Númenóreans would gradually fall to darkness, culminating with the rise of Ar-Pharazôn the Golden. Despite warnings from the Valar, Pharazôn would lead a great armament of many ships in 3319, sailing toward Valinor. Taking in the lies of Sauron, Pharazôn believes the mortal Númenóreans could take immortality by force were they to come to Valinor. The Great Fleet encircles all the Isle of Tol Eressëa. Then landing upon the shores of Valinor, Ar-Pharazôn wavered and almost turned back. His heart misgave him when he looked upon the soundless shores and saw Taniquetil shining, whiter than snow, colder than death, silent, immutable, terrible as the shadow of the light of Ilúvatar. But pride was now his master, and at last he left his ship and strode upon the shore, claiming the land for his own, if none should do battle for it. The Númenórean host camps about the hill of Tuna, and Manwe calls upon Ilúvatar to intervene. Ilúvatar in that moment changes the very fashion of the world. A chasm opens between Númenor and Valinor, and all the fleet is drowned in the Great Sea. Pharazôn and his people that had set foot on the land of Aman were buried under falling hills, and it is said that there they remain, imprisoned in the caves of the Forgotten, until the last battle, the Dagor-Dagorath. Not only would Pharazôn's fleet be lost, but so too would the entire realm of Númenor, overtaken by the sea. In his great changing of the world, Ilúvatar makes Arda from a flat planet to a round one, and the lands of Aman, including Valinor and Tol Eressëa, are no longer part of the physical world. From this moment on, the Undying Lands could only be found by the elves, who were given this special grace of the Valar to travel the straight road via their ships. Over time, countless elves would take the journey to Valinor, for Mandos's prophecy, spoken thousands of years prior, would indeed come true, and the elves would grow weary of the world. Of course, there would be others who would also sail to the uttermost west. The first of these are Bilbo and Frodo Baggins, in 3021 of the Third Age, granted this special privilege as bearers of the One Ring. Over 60 years later, Samwise Gamgee would become the third, sailing west after his wife Rosie's death. These mortals would live out their remaining days in peace on the Isle of Tol Eressëa. The last such mortal to come to the immortal lands of Valinor is also the one and only dwarf to do so. In the 120th year of the Fourth Age, nearly 60 years after Sam's voyage, Gimli would accompany Legolas when he makes his journey on the straight road. While the mortals would live and die after their years of peace in the West, there would yet be an immortal battle to be fought, the Dagor-Dagorath, which we've covered thoroughly in its own video. But it is said that in this time of the last battle, Eonwe will fight with Morgoth upon the plains of Valinor, and that it will be Turin Turambar with his black sword who will finally slay Morgoth. Then the Silmarils shall be recovered from their resting places of sea and air and earth. Then they will be broken, and as the world is remade, the two trees should be rekindled, and their great light come forth once again. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Lissamy the Cinda, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, CCDC Red Team, Joe Tepper, The Mighty Mim, Andrew Carlisle, Swirled Traveler, Matthew Jeffrey, Viking Lord, Alvin Einbert, Jeremy Daniel Derby, Madame Director, Leo Vittori, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Berto Berg, Graham Derricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Z and N, Evely, Kia, Micah Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description to purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.